Hey everybody, I'm Amanda with DevExpress and welcome to 18.1 Launch Week and our third webinar, What's New in DevExtreme HTML5 and JavaScript, presented by DevExpress Web Program Manager Mehul and DevExpress CTO Julian Bucknall. In this session, get an in-depth review of the features we expect to ship for our HTML5 JavaScript product line. This session is being recorded and it will be made available on our DevExpress YouTube channel later today. And we will send the link to the recording in a follow-up email sometime next week. We will also do a live Q&A at the end of this presentation. Just type your questions in the GoToWebinar control panel at any time throughout the broadcast. We do have members of the dev team online with us, so they will try and get to all of your questions as best they can. All right, thank you so much for joining us. I will now hand things over to Julian and Mehul.
Thank you, Amanda, and welcome everybody. And Julian, how are we doing today?
I'm doing well, thanks, Mehul, and hello to everybody out there who are here to hear about DevExtreme and good old JavaScript, my favorite language du jour. So what have we got?
Well, this is the biggest DevExtreme release in sheer volume of the amount of things that we're going to show today. So I'm really excited. We've got performance items, we've got support for new frameworks, all sorts of goodies. Shall we just dive right into it, Julian?
Absolutely, otherwise we're going to run out of time. So let's kick it off.
Absolutely. So what is happening, first of all, I guess let's just address the simple question. Generally, at some point during webinar week, we say, hey, yeah, some of this stuff is available. So is the release available yet?
And unfortunately, no, it isn't. There's been a last-minute snafu, as we might say. And we were hoping it would be released by today, but it looks like it's going to be a couple more days, maybe even next week. So stay tuned and refresh your devexpress.com download manager, like, well, I don't know, every hour or so. We'll obviously tweet about it when it is released, and let's hope it's very soon.
And, you know, a lot of, if you haven't seen our beta and what's new announcement, we sent this out a couple of weeks ago. So a lot of what we're showing today is available to test, to play around with. And if you take a look at the what's new and click on this jQuery Angular React link, you'll see some short descriptions. And so our goal today is to give you a rundown of three main topics: the DevExtreme library of widgets, and our support for all the frameworks that's out there and what we have available there. And then finally, the DevExtreme reactive library. So the reactive set of components from DevExtreme is slightly different code base than DevExtreme proper. All of this top two stuff, it happens to be have a common code base, while this is written for to support native controls that are native to a particular framework, and so they're written slightly differently. And if you're curious at all about that, I can explain that in detail later on in the webinar. So with that, I will say that while we are not released, the good news is if you go to js.devexpress.com and click on demos, all the stuff that we're showing today is live and available now. So with that, Julian, I'll hand it over to you.
So the very first thing we're going to be talking about today is the theming and the look and feel and all that kind of good stuff. The first thing is we're introducing the new material design theme based upon our dear old friends Google, their guidelines for material design. We haven't espoused everything that they do. We'll talk a little bit about the things we're quote ignoring or changing, if you like. But in essence, the new theme is for material design, and it can be customized via the DevExtreme theme builder.
Yeah, that's well said, Julian, because you're right. There were some things that our designers had to kind of take a look at in terms of, does it make sense for our control? So, you know, and their guidelines, right? They're not hard, fast rules.
Exactly.
And so we looked at things like padding and said, okay, if that's too big, we'll take it out. And so Don has a very nice post on this that you can take a look on. Even on js.devexpress.com, we have a blog section that puts together all the different blog posts for DevExtreme related items and goes through the list and all that good stuff. But you can just see material design was one of these highly requested features, and that's because it's Google's default language for everything from mobile to desktop. In fact, if you've seen the new Gmail with the new material design theme, it looks fantastic. And what's nice is you can get this with now all of the DevExtreme controls, and it looks just phenomenal. Obviously, some larger things like scheduler look really nice. And what's really good is we've also extended this material design theme to bring it into our data visualization charts by introducing a new material palette. And I'll talk more about that a little bit later. But it's available in several flavors because material design doesn't have really a base color. So for example, you can have a blue or a lime or orange. And as Julian mentioned, you can actually customize these themes using our theme builder. So if you come in here, you can say, listen, you know what? I want to change around the default light theme or so forth. In fact, let me show you the updated theme builder. I think I have it here somewhere. Yeah. So this is the 18.1 theme builder. Well, it should be soon, and you'll see that we'll have the list of the new material design themes there as well. So that's coming very soon. All right, Julian, let's talk a little bit about some other framework support that we have.
Well, the first thing we ought to talk about is Bootstrap 4 support. So we're talking about themes, and now Bootstrap is one of those things that essentially we have to support, not only because it's extremely popular, but it's also well supported in terms of different themes and skins and whatever. So all DevExtreme components can now be used in applications with Bootstrap 4, and you can import colors from Bootstrap 4 themes into DevExtreme themes. So we're doing this elsewhere as well, aren't we, Bootstrap?
Yeah, Bootstrap, in all the major platforms that we supported, the ASP and DevExtreme as well, we're supporting. So DevExtreme is compatible with Bootstrap, meaning that you can use it with Bootstrap. And if you have a particular Bootstrap theme that you want the DevExtreme controls to adopt the look of the colors and maybe some of the fonts and stuff, you can now import in the Bootstrap file. So with Bootstrap 3, it was the less file. With Bootstrap 4, it's Sass. So you can import in the SCSS variables file. And we support this now with these new tabbed interface in the theme builder. So that's available and it's live. And what you can do with that is when you import that in, you'll see the controls will update, and then it'll generate a CSS file that you can just start using with our DevExtreme widgets. All right, let's move on to Angular, Julian.
And yep.
This is big news because if you are using Angular, and I think right now Angular is perhaps more popular than React and some of the other ones, and that's because it's been around longer. And a lot of enterprises use it. Microsoft supports it with TypeScript, and of course Google loves that Microsoft supports it and has a lot of great Visual Studio integrations. But a lot of our customers are loving the fact that we have these great controls that they can use in enterprise applications. And so with our Angular controls, we have a set of Angular controls that have been around since last year. And these controls basically wrap all the DevExtreme widgets, so all the 65 plus controls that we have, and they take advantage of some native things inside of Angular that you can use. And so we have this great GitHub page where you can see all about it. But what we started doing last year was we started removing our dependency on jQuery. So we still love jQuery. We think jQuery is awesome, but DevExtreme controls used to be reliant on jQuery. Well, they're no longer reliant. I mean, if you like jQuery, you can use jQuery. There's versions of both available. But by removing that dependency, it freed us up to support things like server-side rendering. And I'm happy to say in version 18.1, the DevExtreme Angular components utilize the Angular renderer for DOM manipulations, like native Angular components. So that means you can use our components within Angular universal apps that are rendered both on the client and server side. Now, at this point, you might be going, Julian, you
Why
might be
do
saying,
you do that? Go on. Why is it so special to have both client and server side? Why server side?
two
I thought
major
this
reasons.
was all client, facing apps, and that would be it. Go on.
Absolutely. All right. So two major reasons for server-side rendering. Well, and server-side rendering is important if you have, let's say, a website. Now, this is the version of our golf club demo, and it's using Angular and DevExtreme components. And when I refresh, you're going to say, well, Mehul, it looks just like you're just refreshing. What's really special about this, right? So I'll show you in just a second that when this refresh occurred, you're like, well, nothing special happened. And especially over GoToMeeting, you might be able to not be able to tell the difference between the old way without non-server-side rendering and the new way. So let me first explain why server-side rendering is important. And what happens with Angular, Angular manipulates the DOM. Angular is a framework that when you're first creating the site, you're not writing HTML, you're writing Angular. And so what Angular does, it says, okay, well, I will manage the DOM for you, and that means I will generate the rendering for you. Well, the problem with that sometimes is that you can, when you're first loading this page, you have to download all the libraries, and therefore you have to wait till the page is being rendered. And that becomes a problem in two major instances. One is when you have search engines. Search engines want to see what the page is being rendered like. They don't want to have to wait for some dynamic library to generate that page. They want static rendering. And so static rendering becomes important for those pages. Now, for search engines. On other instances, you also want to be able to have certain parts of your website load quickly while other things are being loaded, and that's for performance. So for example, you may want to say, well, give me the skeleton of my website, give me the nav bar and the background and so forth, because that stuff is static. I don't need Angular to generate that for me. I just want that created. So what we've done and what Angular has done is said, okay, well, we can do server-side rendering where parts of your UI are generated on the server side, delivered first before Angular comes in and says, well, now I'm going to start loading this and that. Now, we can see this using the browser tools here. So if I look at performance here, I'm going to start profiling. I'm going to hit refresh here. And as it loads, we're going to see. So this is running on an internal server, so it's going to take a little bit longer than normal. That's not necessarily the idea that I want to talk about here, but let me just show you. Let me stop the profiler here. So with server-side rendering, we'll see it's going to be slightly different. In fact, let me redo that here. This should be faster a little bit second time around here. So 1,000 to 1,000. All right, so it's loaded now. So what we're going to see here with server-side rendering, before the entire site is done loading, we can see parts of our UI were rendered. It started taking screenshots. So as you can see, I had my background, I have my nav bar, and we can see parts of our UI are already generated before we finished loading all the assets that we needed to load. And that's exactly what we want to occur with server-side rendering. And if we do this without server-side rendering, we're going to see that it's going to take the whole time to generate the UI. Now, that was still quick to load, but you'll see here that without server-side rendering, that we're going to take longer to load our assets before we start painting and drawing all of the different specific items. So it really gives you not just a performance boost, but it solves problems for static sites, for needs for static, for search engines and so forth. All right, it's fantastic. Now, what's nice is if you're curious at all how to get started with this, go to github.com, DevExtreme Angular, and if you're like, how do I find this link? Just type in DevExtreme Angular in Google and you'll land there. If you don't, and don't worry, all the links that I'm showing today, I will put those in our YouTube description that goes along with the video that we post over on YouTube afterwards. So if you do land on this page, then you can see that we have a specific topic where we talk all about server-side rendering, how to get started with it, what you need to do in terms of packages and modules and all that good stuff. All right, Julian, let's now jump over to why this is the biggest release. And that is
because
sorry,
React, and Vue.
And Vue, exactly. I feel like saying bless you when you say Vue. Well, so the big news is in this release, we are including a set of new controls for two major frameworks. And these are for the Vue.js framework, which is now just called Vue, apparently, and React. So what we're doing is, you might say, well, Mehul, you've already have something for React. Yes, we have some native components for React. And I'm going to have some news about native components for Vue later. But in this release, we're including a set of wrappers. Now, these wrappers, I don't really like calling them wrappers because it kind of makes it sound like, somehow they're lesser. To be honest with you, this is, I think, better news than even the native stuff. The native stuff is great, but when we created the native grid, for example, for React, it took us a whole cycle, and we had to make some compromises about what we could put in there. And what's nice about making, so for example, this is the native React grid, right? When we made this, we said we were not going to support theming. We're going to take a couple of existing libraries to support theming. We're not going to make some common controls like editors because those are available somewhere else. We're just going to make a grid. And even then, it took us a full cycle. And then a lot of customers said, you have all of these fantastic controls from DevExtreme, grids, pivot grids, data visualization charts, mapping, etc. Just make them available for Angular, like you did for Angular, for React. And so that's what we've done in this release. We are now making all of these controls available for Vue.js and for React as wrappers. Now, they're available as a CTP, a Community Technology Preview. But what's nice is they are available to use today. And we want you to try them out. We want you to start using them. And all of the controls are available. Now, what's the difference between native and wrappers? Well, Oliver's written a really nice long blog post that dives into it, right? You might think, well, is performance any less? Not really. I mean, performance is really close. There are some minor things like server-side rendering you may get with the native components. But as you see, with the wrappers, you get 65 controls. Right now, we've only got a grid. We're going to bring a chart and scheduler over to the native controls as well. So we're not giving up on native, as I'll talk about a little bit later. But for the wrappers, if I was starting an enterprise application today and I needed powerful controls, I would choose the wrappers. The wrappers, I think, are fantastic. As we said, built-in feature high-performance functionality is available. Using Redux is completely possible. Configuration is actually kind of easier. If you've already used DevExtreme, you're going to find that the code is very similar. And you might say, well, yeah, but that's not really React. That's not how React looks. Fair enough. If you are a stickler about using composable plugins with React, then you're going to prefer the native approach. Just know that, we're still going to work on the native libraries and we want to bring more controls over. It's just going to take us time. So in the meantime, if you need 65 powerful controls for React or Vue, start with this libraries today. And you can find these also on GitHub. And again, I'll have direct links to this, but we've got demos, we've got live examples. For example, here's the DevExtreme data grid in Vue, right? This is the Vue wrapper grid in Vue. I'm not saying that very well, but anyways, you get the idea. You can see these running. You can see these. You can fork these, play with them today, and I would love it. Now, they're not just on GitHub. They're also available, of course, on NPM. So if you go to NPM, or if you just look on Visual Studio, you can type in npm i DevExtreme React or npm i DevExtreme Vue. They are live. They are available, and we will be updating these as you go forward. But really, the GitHub is about you telling us, hey, you know what, try these out. So we've already got customers using these, playing with these, and we'd love to get your feedback. All right, Julian, let me hand it back to you.
Okay, the next, now we've seen frameworks, the next thing to talk about is localization. Basically, we've added and published our new built-in localization API. So you can localize strings that your users will see, and you can basically support, the right formats for numbers and dates and currencies without the use of an external localization library. In the past, we used Globalize and Intel, isn't it? INTL or something like that. Oh, that's it.
Yeah.
We don't have to use those anymore because we've added enough support for localization APIs within our own code.
Yeah, that's excellent. Yeah, I mean, you can still use those, like you said, Julian, but yeah, you may prefer to use the internal API, the built-in localization API that we published. Okay, let's now talk, Julian, about MVC. I remember a time when you used to love MVC, Julian.
Well, it's I just don't do it much anymore. I just write, JavaScript and Node and all that kind of groovy stuff. But
Fair enough.
MVC, yeah, not anymore. Not for me.
Yeah, fair enough, fair enough. Well, what's interesting though is we wrote a set of MVC controls. Now you might say, well, Mehul, you guys have MVC controls for ASP.NET, you got ASP.NET Core stuff, and then you introduce these other MVC controls. And I've mentioned it enough in the past, so I won't go into it. But as I mentioned before about the wrappers, these MVC controls are also wrappers around the DevExtreme client widgets. And therefore, what's nice is for those of you who love ASP.NET MVC and Razor syntax, binding on the server side, these are great for that. And in this release, Julian, I'm really happy to say we've got tooling for these controls in Visual Studio that is going to save you a ton of time, especially if you're making web API controllers and views to consume those controllers. So let me show you essentially what it is. It's a set of wizards in Visual Studio that make life easier. So for example, if you have so let's say here in this example, I just started with a very vanilla ASP.NET MVC application. In this ASP.NET MVC application, the first thing I did to it, I said, I just right-clicked and added the NuGet package for DevExtreme Web. After that, I said, what I want to do, even if I wasn't going to use DevExtreme, if I wanted to create a controller to expose my server-side data, well, I've got a database in SQL Server called Northwind. So the first thing I did was, I went to models and I said, let me make a ADO.NET entity data model. When I did that, I got this DB context. So if you have a simple DB context to anything, right? I mean, your Northwind, data on your server, whatever, as long as you have a DB context, what these wizards can do is they can generate API controllers for you. So if I right click here on controllers and I go add, you'll see this item here and it's called new scaffolded item. And a new scaffolded item could be a controller, it could be a view. And if I click on this, a dialog comes up that lets me choose this DevExtreme Web API controller with actions using Entity Framework or MVC View. And of course, the default Microsoft stuff is still there, but these DevExtreme specific ones make life easier. And so if I click Add for this DevExtreme Web API controller, what it's going to do, it's going to take a look at your project and say, what data context do you have? And it says, oh, you've got one for Northwind, and you can make which model do you want? And I've imported in two tables for customer and product. And once I do that, it's going to tell me, well, if you're going to make a controller for this model class and this DB context, I'll call it customers. Now I've already got customers, so it's going to call it customers one. But once I do that, once I click add, essentially it's going to go and create for me this API controller. What's fantastic is it's going to create all the necessary methods to work with that DB context. Everything from put to delete to populate and update, all that good stuff. And we do this by design because if you don't want delete, you can simply come in here and delete this method. We figure it's better to give it to you and let you decide if you want those or not. Now, at this point, you now have a web API that can be served to any client that you want, anybody on the client side. Now, if you want to go further, and you might say, well, listen, that's great. I've got a web API now, but what if I want to generate a view to consume it? Well, you can, of course, now right-click on Views and select Add and select the new scaffolded item again. And here you can select MVC View with DevExtreme Control. When you do that, a slightly more complicated wizard will come up that lets you name the view, select which control. Now at this point, we're only supporting 2 controls, but we have plans for more in the future. And then you can also select the data source. Again, select the model class and also choose the controller that it's going to bind to. Now, if you don't want this controller, you can also generate a new controller here. I suggest going the route that I've outlined so far. And then finally on the settings, you can choose which columns and what options you'll have on there. And once you click Add, it'll generate this view for you. And what's nice is you've got the controller in there, any specific methods, it's bound to your web API call. All of this is generated for you. So this code generation saves you from having to accidentally mistype something and get an error later and so forth. It just saves you a ton of time to get up and running a lot quicker. Now, if you don't want to generate a view, you can, if you've got an existing project, an existing view, and you just want to add something in there, you can right-click and select Insert DevExtreme Control and get a similar way to add a control there as well. Now, this, Julian, is a way to help our customers because as you saw earlier, back in February, I talked a little bit about how we were sort of deprecating some of the older tools. So we had some way where you can create an OData-based feed that was similar. And that stuff is still kind of there, but we recommend that you use this newer stuff because, you know, nowadays web API is more popular and so forth. Now, again, if you're curious at all, I'll link to my blog post that dives into all of this interesting bit of knowledge, and we'll likely have maybe a video on this later. But we've got even a ticket where you can report specific issues about this stuff. So we've got plans as well to bring in more controls in those dialogues in the future. But I really like this tooling. I do like a MVC, and I love our MVC controls. And apparently, so do our customers. We're seeing a lot of customers choose DevExtreme MVC controls. So if you're using them, definitely try out this tooling. It'll make your life easier. All right, Julian, what's happening with our other controls in DevExtreme?
Let's jump over to the tree list now. And the DevExtreme tree list can now split data across pages. So we have an integrated pager, allows end users to navigate records page by page instead of just scrolling endlessly. The end users can also modify the page size. So there you are with the pager, and you can modify the page size to something else entirely. Except I don't know whether 7 will be allowed. I think your allowed page sizes are 5, 10, and 20.
Oh, all right. Let's try.
Yeah.
So it will be like, again, we're running on a local server, so it's going to be slightly different. But I can actually, now that the demos are live.
Oh, absolutely.
So just show you that, we can go to live and they can try this now and hit 5.
But also the pager has on the left-hand side the ability to select, or the user to select, the page size. So you have 5, 10, and 20 on the left-hand side of the tree list there.
Yeah. So let's say if you wanted 3, we can do that as well. I don't know why you would want to, but hey.
Why not? Why not? Yeah. There we go. 3.
As my British friend says, Bob's your uncle.
Exactly. And we can also now save and restore the layout of the tree list. So your end user spends some time with the tree list, and he basically alters things like the visibility and size of the visual elements in the list, their appearance, filter, sorting information, and we now can save all that layout information. So your user can come in the next morning and it looks exactly the same as they left it the previous evening.
Awesome. Well, not to be outdone, let's talk a little bit about the data grid. This is possibly the most popular control, and for good reason, because everybody needs a powerful data grid, and that's our specialty. So we've added a new feature, Julian, for filtering and sorting. Now, in the 17.2 release, we introduced the filter builder. Now, if you're familiar with other DevExpress grids, you know the filter builder very well. It's probably the most powerful way your end users can filter data because it allows them a UI to essentially granularly filter out the data. And we built this off of for example, we'll list you the columns, and we provide a set of common English terms that they can use, like contains, starts with, and so forth, and then they can enter custom values and so forth. And so this was previously a standalone control, and we integrated it in this current release. Now, you might be going, well, why did it take you a full release to integrate it in there? Well, to be honest with you, we had to make sure that this filtering can sync with the existing filtering options. And that's what's really nice about this, is because if I do filter out, for example, some information here or some information here, they need to sync up together. And so in the previous release, we wanted to integrate it in there, but we just had to make sure. And I'm happy to say that it is now synced up very well. It's built in, and it saves you from having to have it externally. Now, if you still want it externally, it's still possible to do that. It's just that a lot of customers, I think, probably prefer having it internally, because not only can you build a set of different filter criteria that your end users can check and uncheck, but they have the power themselves to do this as well. Now,
in essence, you're giving the user the ability to write some code, except it's not designed as code in a text file or anything like that. And it's a very nice visual way of filtering information.
Yeah, absolutely. I like I said, the filter builder, in my opinion, is one of the best ways that you can provide your customers the power to, because ad hoc querying is what this grid is all about, and you want to give them the best tools to do that ad hoc querying.
Yep.
All right, the next one, I love this feature. In fact, you know what? I think I said as much in the blog post we just released today, and that is, oh man, by the way, if you haven't seen the new DevExpress site, I really recommend you play with it. It's really nice. But yeah, so as I said, I love it when our devs can squeeze out every last bit of performance. And that's what they've done in this release. They have improved the performance for the grid in several ways, mainly related to scrolling. So the way they did this was they improved let's just take a look here, the virtual scrolling. So let's start with actually horizontal scrolling. Now, again, if you want to read all the details about it, you can read it on this blog post. And what happened is, essentially, we looked at what was happening with virtual scrolling, and we figured out some interesting things that we can do. Things like, disposing out of bounds items that makes the grid even faster. So when things are out of the visible boundaries, we just, clean them up. So when you're doing intensive scrolling, it works a lot better. So what happens is, for example, we had customers also report to us some feedback about some things they were seeing. So we took a look, and so here I've got a grid that has several rows, about 50 rows. And as you can see, as I'm scrolling down, this is literally keeping up with my mouse. It is now synchronous. Why? Well, because we have now increased the performance in a way that we find if the markup of each row isn't too heavy. And what I mean by that is, if you don't have a bunch of images or something really heavy per row, we can literally make the grid synchronous when scrolling. Now, if it is heavy, don't worry, the grid is smart enough to go, well, listen, if I try to make a row that's too heavy synchronous, you're going to start getting a jerking motion. And that's not useful for anybody. So it'll revert back to the asynchronous method. And that's really nice. Now, what's really cool is even on a grid. Now, this grid, take a look here, Julian. I've got here about, let's see, 500 columns. I didn't think
Twitch. I go, ah.
Yeah, you know what? I don't know.
That many columns? Yeah. No, yeah.
Surprisingly, some customers do that, and that's they have valid scenarios for that. And so what's nice is we've also increased performance for horizontal scrolling. So you can now use new rendering modes for column rendering to virtual that'll basically allow you to virtually render those items as well. And as you can see, it works very nice, right? Look how fast I can scroll that across columns and both, as you saw, rows. So that is available and built in, and by upgrading to 18.1, you're going to get that feature. Now, we've also improved remote virtual scrolling. So remote virtual road rendering can be improved by setting it to virtual. So as you'll see here, when I scroll down, it's improved. It loads very quickly. But probably one of my favorite features is not just the performance, but take a look at how when I scroll down, Julian, in the past, when I used to scroll down, a little icon would pop up that said loading, a little spinning thing would come up.
Yep, that's right.
That's gone. We've now got a more modern, awesome way that I think is just more intuitive. In fact, I think Mark Miller would love it since he loves, science of UI and all that good stuff. But when I scroll down really quickly, watch what happens to the rows. You're looking at text now. As I scroll down, what's going to happen? Oops, not when I highlight. When I scroll down, what starts to happen? Oops, actually, you know what? That's the old way. Let me show you.
Exactly. Hey, come on, new way.
Exactly. Yeah. So let me bring over, where did it go? Filter panel, remote. Yeah, here we go. So now when I scroll down, what's going to happen is the rows, as you saw, instead of showing text, it shows blocks. And I feel that's more intuitive, right? So it's still actually a loading indicator, and we got that small loading screen, but what the end user now feels is like, oh wow, look at this, the data isn't exactly loaded, but I feel like I'm scrolling through something. So visually they feel like that data is somehow maybe there behind the blocks, or it's going to get loaded very quickly, and that's exactly what's happening. So even though you may be going against 1 million records, you're going to get a really nice end user experience, right? So it's just a way.
Exactly. It's just a way, basically, of showing the end user that something is happening, and it's a visual representation of their movement through these records. And if you think about it, those people who use Facebook, it does roughly the same kind of thing. When you first load up your timeline, it shows blocks, like those gray blocks we just showed you, and then suddenly, yep, your timeline gets generated, and you get your real posts and all the rest of it. So it's a very nice visual way to let the user know he hasn't done anything wrong. We're just scrolling very quickly.
Yeah, I love it when we can inspire Facebook. I mean, those guys, right? They're always stealing our great ideas. Well, I mean, they only created the React framework, but yeah, no, I mean, they always come up with some great web ideas. But I like this new metaphor, and especially in client-side apps like this, you can take advantage of this. And all these features we're showing with tree list and all the DevExtreme stuff, it's across the board, right? All the frameworks that we support, MVC, Angular, the React wrappers, the Vue wrappers, they all get these excellent features. All right, let me talk one last thing about the grid, and that is we've got a set of built-in icons for the editing command column. And so this icon mode you can easily set by setting editing use icons to true. If you set it to false, in the old you'll get the good old edit button, the edit links and delete links, which are fine. I like those as well. But I'm a big fan of icons when they're useful, right? And so if you just set use icons to true, you get these snazzy icons for edit and delete. And what's nice is as you change the theme, the icons will adapt to the relevant theme. So for material design, you'll get material design icons. For our other themes, you'll get the ones that match those themes as well. All right, Julian, let me hand it to you.
Okay, since we've talked about the tree list and the data grid, let's now switch over to the pivot grid.
We can pivot to the pivot grid. I'm sorry.
Very good, very good. Yeah, yeah, okay. Mehul is here all week and Sundays too. So the pivot grid, what we've done here is to extend our API for the pivot grid to improve performance when operating with large volumes of data. So you can now configure our pivot grid to apply layout changes after a user has completed the configuration process. Now what this means is in the old days, like at the moment, the user, if you configured something, what would happen in the background is the pivot grid would automatically and immediately apply those changes. So if you have a dialog like this with lots of nice checkboxes, every single checkbox that got checked or unchecked, the pivot grid would essentially reload. And as you can imagine, that's a lot of work. So what we've done now is to allow the end user basically to apply the changes he makes, the configuration changes he makes or she makes, when they press OK. And the pivot grid only has to refresh the once.
Yeah, it's a really nice feature because as you mentioned, each time I'm clicking this, the pivot grid is updating and so forth. So it just makes sense to say, listen, why would I want to do a bunch of, if I'm going to set 5 different fields and each time I click it, well, I mean, and if you like the old way, that's fine, right? But this I believe is useful to have these OK cancel buttons. So if you set it to on demand, you get the buttons. You set it to instantly, you get the old way, and that is to instantly do it. So if you prefer it, you can pick your poison, as they say.
Yeah, it depends on how much data you're processing within the pivot grid, of course. If you have not very much data, it doesn't really matter. It's really quick anyway. But if you have a lot of data, then applying a change every single time you actually make that change, woo. Anyway, let's move on from the pivot grid to
scheduler. So,
or as we say in England, scheduler.
I can't even say. I can't even pronounce scheduler. I'm in awe. All right, so let's talk about the scheduler, and we've got 2 excellent features for it. And the first is group orientation, which allows you can now display appointment groups as rows within the view with static titles. So what that means is right now with the horizontal display, I've got the resources here on the left-hand side. Now, the scheduler looks pretty good in Material Design. So let's take a look at the scheduler in Material Design here. And what's nice is that I've got them on the left-hand side here. But if you prefer, you can. Oops. You know what? Let's use the other one here because that one probably is still updating. With the top grouping here, you can now use vertical grouping or horizontal grouping. And so what's nice is with the horizontal grouping, you now get a row at the top that your end users can scroll to the right. So what's the benefit of this? Well, you get more vertical space for the scheduler. So as you can see, the appointments go all the way down and then they scroll down and see the appointments this way. However, with vertical grouping, you can see that it's on the left-hand side and there's less vertical space, but there's more horizontal space. So it's just up to you and what your end user prefers to use. Now, we've also introduced in this release a new context menu. Now, when I first heard about this, I was like, wait a minute, we had some kind of context menu. Well, no, we actually didn't. What it was is if you click on an appointment, yes, a little pop-up comes up that lets you open or delete the appointment. But we're now actually introducing a new context menu that when you right-click on an empty cell or even on an existing cell, you get some default buttons like open and delete, of course, or create new appointment. But what's nice is you all can also customize this because we're introducing a couple of API calls like on context menu or on cell context menu that when you right click, for example, on an existing one, you can say, let me change the resource. In this case, it's rooms, and I can change the resource of the room from room 101 to the meeting room. And now all of those appointments related there will update as well. So as you can see, it's a really nice, powerful way to integrate. And again, you can completely customize how and what it reacts to. All right, Julian, let me hand it back to you.
Okay, so we've done scheduler, we've done all those kind of widgets. Let's go into some data visualization things here. So DevExtreme charts. We're now supporting the following data aggregation usage scenarios, whatever that means. I'm just reading it. And basically, we're doing built-in data aggregation for average, sum, range, count, min, max, and all those other good things. We're adding some custom aggregation functions, so you can write your own aggregation type things like average over 2 or something like that. I don't know. The ability to specify aggregation intervals as well, so you can change that. And of course, once you aggregate some data, you need to be able to say, well, how did I calculate that again? So get an aggregated point and show it's the original source points. And configuring aggregation at a series level or essentially for the entire chart.
Excellent. Excellent. So what else is happening with data visualization?
So bar charts, we're changing the way we or allow you to set the bar width and the spacing between bars. Customization enhancements, we have things like specifying different bar widths for different bar series within the chart, adjusting the spacing between the bar groups, and fixing the width of a bar or a bar group in pixels. And as Mehul is showing here, basically it's a way to be able to separate the bars more perhaps, or emphasize certain bars and so on and so forth.
And what's nice about this is this came directly from customer requested feedback. So keep that feedback going. I mean, you know, we're always
Absolutely.
saying... Yeah, we're always saying
I can't emphasize. Yeah, I can't emphasize it enough. A lot of our stuff, the team comes up with, but a lot of our new features and enhancements come directly from you, the customer. So if you've got an idea or you really want such and such a feature, let us know. Really, it's the simple ones will go, oh yeah, we should have done that. Duh, and put it in the next major release or minor release. But sometimes customers have really great ideas because after all, you are writing applications for your users and customers, and we are just basically writing controls.
And with that, Julian, as I mentioned before, for this release, we also since we introduced the new material theme, we're introducing this new material palette for our charts. And it's so good. I mean, I think there's a blog post I wrote about it that shows the difference from the old and the new, that we are now defaulting to this new palette. So these colors just pop and they're really nice. And of course, here's your favorite chart in the world, Julian, pie chart. But with this release, we're also introducing new palette extension modes. And these palette extension modes can help you because they use different algorithms. Blend does it with like 2 neighboring colors or something like that. So we talk about it in the documentation and of course in some blog posts as well. But play around with these new palettes, play around with these new themes because they're really nice. All right, with that, what's happening with our UI widgets, Julian?
So you talked a little bit earlier about the filter builder being integrated into the data grid. So we've added some new features to the filter builder. We have a is-between or between type operator. And even better, I think, is the ability to write your own filter operation. So you don't have to use ours if you don't want to use ours. You can write your own bit of code, and like is any of here is not one of our standard ones. Provide a list and write that little bit of code, and boom.
Yeah, and so like you mentioned, we've got this new one, is between, for this release, and is any of lets you create custom operations. And what's nice is both the standalone and the built-in filter builder in the grid both support this. So again, I'm just loving the filter builder enhancements.
And before we run out of time, it's time to really look at...
Should we jump to reactive stuff?
Yeah, I think we ought to jump there.
All right, sounds good. All right, so everything so far, what we've talked about is just the one that is related to the DevExtreme. Now, if you have been following our stuff on GitHub, we have this library called DevExtreme Reactive, which we first introduced with our native React controls. And this is where essentially we build native components, business components for React and Vue. And in this release, we're also introducing a new library for, I shouldn't say library, a new control, a native control for Vue.js, just the same way that we have done for, let me bring that up 1 second, for the same way we have done for React. And so if you've seen our DevExtreme React grid, right, and eventually we'll have a nice landing page like this for the Vue as well, but it's going to be available and provide you a similar set of functionality. So let me just bring that up real quick here.
And the important point to recognize here is that DevExtreme was written essentially for jQuery, and we've had to modify it for Angular and so on and so forth. But with React, you've got to imagine that React is like these Russian dolls. Basically, a React component comprises a whole bunch of other React components. So it's like Russian dolls. You open it up, there's another Russian doll inside, and you open that up, and there's another one inside. So React has to be, if you like, reactive all the way down. And so we provided the wrappers for our current widgets, which is fine, works well, as you said earlier on, Mehul. But if you really want the the React all the way down stuff, this is what we're talking about here. We have to basically rewrite everything.
Right. And so again, I'll start with this thing that, we have a whole blog post that talks about it. And I feel like if you just need a grid and that's all you want for Vue right now, yeah, try the native stuff. But otherwise, I think the wrappers are a great way to go as well, right? Now, we're working on this website, so right now you don't see a landing page or anything like that and all that good stuff. But we really wanted to show you, yes, this is really, really close and we're almost there. So just, we're just dotting the I's and crossing the T's. And so some of this is going to be available very, very soon. Keep an eye on our DevExtreme Twitter page, and we'll post announcements there. We'll post announcements on our DevExtreme page, all that good stuff. But what's nice about this is it's very similar in terms of what the React grid provides, right? The native React grid. So example, we've got, paging built in. We've got some support for existing Bootstrap themes and so forth. So as we go forward, we'll do more and more, right? Here's the sketchy theme, which I know how much you love that, Julian.
Oh, shudder.
And the cyborg, but all that good stuff. But we've even got data editing, and data editing, my friends, is not easy. But it looks very nice. It's got some of these great features built in, and we'll keep building this up. Now, speaking of the native React grid, this grid actually has some new features as well. Now, the first is we've now got support for a tree view mode. So it's not even a separate control, it's built right into the grid, and that's the ability to display and work with hierarchical data. So as you can see, this tree view mode still gives us all the great features like sorting and all that, but also with hierarchical information. So take a look at that, it's available now. And we also have support for header bands. Now, if you've seen header bands from our other controls, you'll be familiar, but it's a way to organize, it's under Redux. It's a way to organize the information in the columns in a way that tells somebody what the information belongs to. So for example, you can tell somebody like first name, last name is part of full name, which is part of personal data. And personal data also includes this other field called birth date. And so we allow you to change the column sizes and so forth, and you can still click on things to sort by them and all that good stuff. But what's nice about this is this header band really allows you to quickly, or your end users to quickly see what's available and what's not. All right, with that, Julian, I think maybe if we have time, we can talk a little bit about any customer questions. But let me just recap. We have a set of wrappers available now for Vue. It's not called Vue.js. You may hear me occasionally call it Vue.js. Apparently now they just want to be called Vue. So for Vue, for the Vue framework, and also for the React framework, all of the DevExtreme controls are available as wrappers. And we have them available on our GitHub page. If you go to DevExtreme-Vue, DevExtreme-React, or DevExtreme-Angular, you find those controls for these powerful frameworks. As well as if you go to DevExtreme.com, you find all of the items related to the MVC controls as well. And we have a ton of great performance enhancements as well as a ton of great features. So that's all I have, Julian. Should we take some questions? Do you think we have time?
I don't know. I mean, the team have been answering questions in the background, and but here we are, getting into the late 50s for this particular webinar. So just to emphasize to everybody, the demos for 18.1 are now up on js.devexpress.com. So you can play around to your heart's content with all the new stuff. And I reiterate, we're trying to get the release out as soon as possible, but no, I won't give a firm date at the moment. It should be any day, basically.
Yeah, very, very close, very close. And again, just we're dotting the I's and crossing the T's, right, Julian?
Absolutely, indeed.
Awesome. All right. Well, listen, as I mentioned, if you missed any of the links, don't worry. Don't be like, oh, how do I find that? Google that. If you've seen our YouTube page, or just if you Google DevExpress YouTube, we should be the top link. And this is like a fantastic channel. We're always putting all our good stuff up there. But as soon as this is done, Amanda will post our webinar on YouTube. And if you click on one of these links, in the description, we will have, I'll post all the links in here for everything that we showed today. So don't worry if you can't find anything specific. We'll make sure they're easy to access.
Absolutely. Yep.
All right, with that, before I hand it back to you, Amanda, I just want to say thank you, everybody. Thank you, Julian. And here's our Twitter logins, our emails. We'd love to hear from you. And thank you again.
Julian's clock chiming.
Yeah, it is on the hour.
Yep. Perfect signal. All right, everybody. Like we mentioned before, today's webinar will be made available later on our DevExpress YouTube channel. I did post the link in the chat box. You will also get a follow-up email with links to all of our launch webinar recordings sometime next week. We have one more 18.1 launch session tomorrow covering dashboards, reporting, and analytics. Same time, 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Julian will be back. Along with our technical evangelist, Paul Usher. You can register at devexpress.com/webinars. And that is it for this one. Thank you so much to Mehul and Julian. Thank you all for joining us. And of course, thank you for choosing DevExpress. Bye-bye.